In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a sleek prototype race car, the Silver Arrow, vanishes from a locked garage on the eve of the Grand Prix, threatening to shatter Tansuo, derail the dreams of driver Roger Blake, mechanic Tom Weaver, and wealthy sponsor Sir Henry Caldwell. Was it a rival team sabotage, led by cunning Victor Lang, or an inside betrayal? Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of greed, resentment, and ambition, uncovering secrets that race faster than any car. Who stole the Silver Arrow, and will she find the truth before the finish line? Chapter 1. The Vanishing Machine. The morning sun cast a soft glow over St. Mary Mead, its rays filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, where she sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking with the steady rhythm of a metronome. The village, nestled in its familiar quiet, seemed untouched by the modern world, save for the occasional hum of a motor car or the chatter of villagers at the post office. Yet today, an undercurrent of excitement, or perhaps unease, rippled through the air, carried to Miss Marple's ears by the breathless voice of young Tommy Pierce, the postman's lad, who paused his bicycle outside her garden gate. "Gone, miss, just gone," Tommy was saying to Mrs. Bantry, who had stopped to adjust her hat. "The Silver Arrow, that fancy race car, vanished from the garage last night. They're saying it's sabotage, what with the Grand Prix tomorrow." Miss Marple's needles paused, though her expression remained serene. The Silver Arrow was no ordinary machine. It was the pride of the local racing team, a prototype of sleek silver curves and roaring power, designed to outpace all rivals in the upcoming Grand Prix at the nearby Dunworth circuit. Its driver, Roger Blake, was a name on every villager's lips, a dashing figure whose charm was as renowned as his daring on the track. For such a car to disappear from a locked garage was not merely a theft, it was a scandal, a deliberate affront to the village's pride. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp despite her years, glinted with interest. She had seen many puzzles in St. Mary Mead, petty thefts, jealous quarrels, even murder. But a missing race car was a novelty, and novelties, she knew, often hid familiar sins. Setting her knitting aside, she rose and donned her best hat, a sensible black affair with a single feather. "I think," she murmured to herself, "a walk to the high street might be in order." The garage, a modern structure of corrugated iron and glass, stood just beyond the village, near the estate of Sir Henry Caldwell, the team's wealthy sponsor. It was there, she decided, that the truth would begin to unfold. The high street buzzed with gossip as Miss Marple made her way, her unassuming figure drawing little attention. At the baker's, Mrs. Price was telling anyone who would listen that the rival team, led by Victor Lang, had been seen lurking near Dunworth. At the tea shop, old Mr. Pye shook his head, muttering about young Blake's recklessness and how it might have invited trouble. Miss Marple listened, her face placid, but her mind catalogued each snippet, much as she might note the peculiarities of a new stitch. Human nature, she had long observed, was as predictable as it was devious, and the disappearance of the Silver Arrow bore the hallmarks of calculation. At the garage, she found Inspector Craddock, a competent man whose furrowed brow betrayed the weight of this unusual case. He greeted her with a mix of respect and exasperation, for Miss Marple's knack for solving crimes was both a blessing and a mild affront to his professional pride. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat, "I suppose you've heard. The Silver Arrow, gone without a trace, the locks untouched, the windows secure. It's as if the thing sprouted wings. "Indeed," said Miss Marple, her voice mild. "May I see the scene, Inspector?" I find that small details often speak loudly. Craddock, accustomed to her requests, led her inside. The garage was a cavernous space, its concrete floor stained with oil and its walls lined with tools. The empty space where the Silver Arrow should have stood was stark, like a missing tooth in a perfect smile. Miss Marple's eyes roamed, noting the undisturbed lock, the faint tire marks that led to the door and then vanished, and a stray wrench lying oddly alone near a workbench. A faint whiff of petrol lingered, though the car was gone. She stooped, her joints protesting, and peered at the floor. "Curious," she murmured. "How clean it is, save for that wrench." Craddock followed her gaze. "We've bagged it for evidence, but it's likely one of Tom Weaver's, the mechanic. He's beside himself, says he checked the car at 10 last night and locked up tight." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to a village carpenter she once knew, who left a chisel at a scene of mischief, not by accident, but by design. She straightened, her gaze settling on the three men hovering nearby: Roger Blake, his handsome face taut with worry; Tom Weaver, his oil-stained hands clenched; and Sir Henry Caldwell, whose booming voice was unusually subdued. "Such a loss," Sir Henry said, mopping his brow. "The Silver Arrow was my investment, my legacy. Who would dare?" Roger Blake shook his head, his jaw tight. "I drove her perfectly yesterday. She was ready to win." Tom Weaver muttered something about no good coming from flashy machines, his eyes avoiding Miss Marple's. She smiled faintly, her mind already weaving a tapestry of motives. A driver's ambition, a mechanic's resentment, a sponsor's pride, or perhaps an outsider's envy. She thought of a church bazaar where a stolen brooch had revealed a tangle of loyalties and betrayals, and she knew this puzzle would be no different. "Thank you, Inspector," she said, turning to leave. "I shall think on this. People, you know, are rarely as clever as they believe." As she walked back to her cottage, the village settling into its evening hush, Miss Marple's mind was alight. The Silver Arrow's disappearance was no mere theft. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down by someone who thought themselves untouchable. But Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom and unerring eye, had met such challenges before. The truth, she knew, lay not in the car itself, but in the hearts of those who coveted it. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The late morning light spilled over St. Mary Mead, painting the cobbled lanes and thatched roofs with a deceptive calm. Miss Jane Marple, her black hat firmly in place, walked with measured steps toward the edge of the village, where the modern intrusion of Sir Henry Caldwell's racing garage stood like a sentinel of progress amid the timeless fields. The disappearance of the Silver Arrow, that sleek marvel of engineering, had stirred the village into a frenzy of speculation, and Miss Marple, ever attuned to the undercurrents of human behavior, felt the familiar prick of curiosity. She had seen thefts before, petty pilfering of silver spoons or garden ornaments, but a race car, crafted for speed and glory, vanishing from a locked garage? That was a puzzle of a different order, one that promised to reveal the frailties of ambition, envy, or greed. The garage, a stark rectangle of corrugated iron and smoked glass, loomed ahead, its utilitarian design clashing with the soft greens of the surrounding meadows. As Miss Marple approached, she noted the small crowd gathered at the gate, villagers craning for a glimpse, a reporter from the Dunworth Gazette scribbling notes, and a constable attempting to maintain order. Inspector Craddock, his face etched with the strain of a case that defied logic, spotted her and waved her through with a resigned nod. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice carrying a mix of deference and mild frustration. "I knew you'd turn up. You've a nose for these things, haven't you?" "A mere interest in people, Inspector," she replied, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "And people, as you know, are often at the heart of such mysteries. May I see where the silver arrow was kept?" Craddock led her through the heavy steel door, its lock gleaming and unscarred, into the cavernous interior of the garage. The air was sharp, with the scent of petrol and polished metal, though the absence of the car itself left the space feeling hollow, like a stage without its star. The concrete floor, swept clean save for a few smudges of oil, stretched toward the far wall, where racks of tools hung in precise rows. A workbench stood to one side, cluttered with spanners, rags, and a solitary wrench that seemed out of place, its handle too clean for the grime of daily use. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on it, her mind flitting to a village seamstress who once left a pristine needle at a scene of mischief, a clue to her carelessness. "No sign of forced entry," Craddock said, gesturing at the door. "The lock's a new model, pick-proof, they say. Windows are barred and intact. The Silver Arrow was here at 10 last night when Tom Weaver locked up, and by 6 this morning, it was gone. No tire marks outside, no footprints, nothing. It's as if the thing was spirited away." Miss Marple tilted her head, her lips pursing slightly. "Spirited away, Inspector? I doubt we need invoke the supernatural. People are quite capable of spiriting things themselves, if they've motive enough." She stepped forward, her sensible shoes tapping softly on the concrete, and examined the empty bay where the car had stood. The floor here was curiously clean, as if someone had taken care to erase any trace. She bent, ignoring the twinge in her knees, and peered at a faint smudge near the edge of the bay. A trace of rubber, perhaps, or something else. "Curious," she murmured, "how selective the cleaning seems to be." Craddock followed her gaze, frowning. "We've noted that. The floor's spotless here, but not elsewhere. Could be the thief swept up after himself. But why bother?" "Why, indeed," said Miss Marple, straightening. She turned her attention to the workbench, where the stray wrench lay like an accusation. "This wrench, Inspector, does it belong here?" "Tom Weaver says it's his," Craddock replied, "but he swears he left it with the others last night. We've sent it for prints, though I doubt we'll find much. The thief was careful." "Careful," Miss Marple echoed, her voice soft. "Or perhaps someone wishes us to think so." She recalled a young curate in St. Mary Mead, years ago, who had left a book out of place to distract from a theft. The wrench, she suspected, was no accident. It was too pristine, too deliberately misplaced. She filed the thought away, her mind already weaving a pattern from the threads of the scene. Outside, the 3 men most closely tied to the Silver Arrow stood in a tense knot. Roger Blake, the driver, his dark hair tousled and his eyes shadowed. Tom Weaver, the mechanic, his broad shoulders hunched and his face set in a scowl. And Sir Henry Caldwell, the sponsor, whose florid complexion and booming voice were subdued by the morning's shock. Miss Marple observed them from the doorway, her expression one of mild curiosity, though her mind was sharp as a blade. Each man, she knew, had a stake in the Silver Arrow, and each, in his way, was a study in human nature. Roger Blake stepped forward, his charm dimmed but not extinguished. "Miss Marple," he said, managing a weak smile. "I heard you were here. It's a rotten business, isn't it? That car was my ticket to the championship. I checked her myself last night. Perfect condition. Who'd do this?" Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes noting the faint tremor in his hands. "A great loss, Mr. Blake. You were in the garage late then?" "Till about 11, he said quickly. "Just a final look at the controls. She was a beauty, Miss Marple, fast as lightning, and mine to drive." His voice held a note of pride, but his glance darted toward Tom Weaver, who stood glowering nearby. "And you, Mr. Weaver?" Miss Marple turned to the mechanic, her tone gentle but probing. "You locked up after Mr. Blake?" Tom Weaver shifted, his oil-stained hands flexing. "Aye, at 10 sharp. I checked every bolt, every gauge. The Silver Arrow was secure when I left. My wife will tell you I was home by past. His voice was gruff, but his eyes avoided hers, and Miss Marple noted the slight flush at his neck. She thought of a gardener she once knew, honest in his work, but bitter when slighted, and wondered what grudge Tom might hold. Sir Henry Caldwell, unable to remain silent, interjected with a bluster that seemed forced. "This is an outrage, Miss Marple. That car was my vision, my investment in British engineering. I'll have the police comb the county until it's found. Whoever did this will rue the day." His face was red, but his eyes flickered with something less certain. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. Miss Marple recalled a churchwarden who masked financial troubles with loud piety, and she wondered what Sir Henry's bravado concealed. "Thank you, gentlemen," she said, her voice as calm as a summer afternoon. "I'm sure the inspector will get to the bottom of this. A car, after all, cannot vanish into thin air. It has been moved, and by someone with purpose." She turned to Craddock, who was watching the exchange with interest. "Inspector, have you considered the rival team? I understand Victor Lang's Red Comet is the Silver Arrow's chief competitor." Craddock nodded. "We're looking into it. Lang's team is based in Dunworth, not far off, but we've no evidence they were here, and getting a car out without a trace, well, it's a tall order, even for them." "Indeed," said Miss Marple, her mind already turning to a poacher she once caught, who moved stolen goods under cover of night with meticulous care. "But tall orders are often met by those with ambition. I shall leave you to your work, Inspector, but do keep me informed. Small things, you know, can be most revealing." As she made her way back to the village, the sun climbing higher, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of observations. The clean floor, the misplaced wrench, the faint scent of petrol that lingered despite the car's absence. These were not random. They pointed to a mind at work, one that planned and perhaps miscalculated. She thought of Roger Blake's restless hands, Tom Weaver's evasive glance, Sir Henry's forced outrage. And then there was Victor Lang, whose name hung in the air like a shadow. She recalled a village gossip who spread lies to divert suspicion, and she wondered who, among these men, was playing a similar game. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting resumed. The village buzzed outside, but her mind was elsewhere, sifting through the morning's impressions. The Silver Arrow's disappearance was no act of chance. It was a deliberate move in a larger game. And Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom and unerring instinct, was determined to uncover the player behind it. "People," she murmured to herself, "are never so clever as they think, and that, I fancy, will be their undoing." Chapter 3. The Driver's Tale. The afternoon sun draped St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, softening the edges of the village's quaint cottages and lending an air of tranquility that belied the morning scandal. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her rose-patterned parlor, had invited Roger Blake, the dashing driver of the vanished Silver Arrow, for tea. Her invitation, delivered via a note carried by young Tommy Pierce, was couched in terms so polite and unassuming that refusal would have seemed churlish. Miss Marple knew well the power of a quiet setting. A cup of tea and a cozy chair could loosen tongues far better than any interrogation room. Roger arrived promptly at 3, his tall frame filling the doorway. His dark hair was neatly combed, but his eyes, a striking blue, carried a shadow of unease. He wore a tailored jacket, slightly crumpled, as if he had dressed in haste, and his smile, though charming, flickered like a candle in a draught. "Miss Marple," he said, taking her hand with a warmth that seemed practiced. "It's awfully kind of you to invite me. I'm afraid I'm not much company today. Not with the Silver Arrow gone." "Nonsense, Mr. Blake," Miss Marple replied, her voice as soothing as the ticking of her mantel clock. "A cup of tea can do wonders, even in the face of such a mystery. Do sit down." She gestured to a chintz-covered armchair, its cushions plump with invitation, and busied herself with the tea tray. The ritual of pouring, china cups, a silver strainer, the faint clink of a spoon, was deliberate, giving her time to observe her guest. Roger's hands, she noted, fidgeted with the edge of his saucer, and his gaze darted to the window, as if expecting pursuit. The parlor, with its lace doilies and faded photographs, was a world away from the sleek modernity of the racing garage, yet Miss Marple sensed that the secrets of one could be unraveled in the other. She handed Roger his tea, her eyes gentle but piercing. "Now, Mr. Blake," she began, settling into her own chair, "tell me about last night. You were at the garage, I understand, checking the Silver Arrow?" Roger nodded, sipping his tea with a touch too much haste. "Yes, around 10 or so. I like to go over the car myself before a big race. The controls, the steering, everything has to feel right. The Silver Arrow was perfect, Miss Marple. Fastest machine I've ever driven. I locked the cockpit and left by 11. I'd say, Tom Weaver was still there, fussing with his tools. His voice was earnest, but his fingers tightened on the cup, and Miss Marple, who had once known a choir boy whose sincerity masked mischief, took note. 11 is quite late, she remarked, her tone as mild as the afternoon light. "And you went straight home?" "To my lodgings in Dunworth." "Yes," Roger said quickly. "I've a room at the Red Lion. The barman saw me come in. Must have been 11:30. I was knackered, went straight to bed." His smile returned, but it was strained, and Miss Marple's mind flickered to a young man in St. Mary Mead who had claimed an alibi with similar alacrity, only to be undone by a forgotten detail. She stirred her tea, the spoon's soft clink filling the brief silence. "It must be terribly disappointing," she said, "to lose such a car on the eve of the Grand Prix. I understand it was your chance to outshine Victor Lang's Red Comet. Quite a rivalry, I hear." Roger's jaw tightened, and for a moment his charm faltered. "Victor's a snake," he said, then caught himself, forcing a laugh. "Sorry, that's not gentlemanly. But yes, the Red Comet's fast, and Victor's not above playing dirty. He's been needling me all season. Comments about my driving, my team. If anyone had reason to steal the Silver Arrow, it's him." His voice carried conviction, but Miss Marple noted the way. His eyes slid away, as if reluctant to meet her gaze. She thought of a village shopkeeper who had accused a rival to deflect suspicion, and wondered if Roger's anger was as straightforward as it seemed. "And you saw nothing unusual at the garage?" she pressed, her needles clicking softly as she resumed her knitting, a pale blue scarf taking shape. "No strangers, no odd noises?" "Nothing," Roger said, shaking his head. "Just Tom, grumbling as usual. He's a good mechanic, but he's got a chip on his shoulder. Blames me for a crash last year. Said I pushed the car too hard, ruined his work. Absolute rot, but he's held a grudge ever since." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "If you ask me, Miss Marple, you might look at Tom. He's got keys to the garage, and he's not exactly my biggest fan." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles never faltering. "Grudges can be powerful things," she said. "I once knew a lady's maid who harbored such a resentment over a slight, a mere word, really, that she took to hiding her mistress's jewelry just to cause distress. People can act most unwisely when pride is wounded." Her words were gentle, but her eyes were sharp, watching Roger's reaction. He flushed slightly, his fingers tapping the armrest, and she filed the observation away. They spoke a little longer of racing and the Grand Prix, but Miss Marple steered the conversation deftly, gleaning what she could. Roger mentioned Sir Henry Caldwell's insistence on perfection, how the sponsor had poured a fortune into the Silver Arrow, and how the loss had left him apoplectic. "Sir Henry's a decent sort," Roger said, "but he's all about the glory. If the car's not found, he'll take it personally." Miss Marple nodded, recalling a village squire whose pride in his roses masked a deeper need for control. Sir Henry, she suspected, was not unlike him. As Roger rose to leave, thanking her for the tea, Miss Marple stood, her small figure belying the keenness of her mind. "One last thing, Mr. Blake," she said, her voice as soft as the lace on her table. "When you left the garage, did you notice anything about the lock? Was it secure?" Roger paused, his hand on the doorframe. "Secure as ever," he said, but his hesitation was a fraction too long, and Miss Marple's memory stirred. A boy in the village, caught stealing apples, had paused just so when asked about a gate. "Tom locked up after me," Roger added, his smile returning. "You'd have to ask him." "I shall," Miss Marple said, her expression serene. "Thank you, Mr. Blake. Do take care." As he stepped into the garden, his figure outlined against the setting sun, she watched him go, her mind already sifting through his words. Roger Blake was charming, yes, and his story plausible, but plausibility, she knew, was often a thief's best disguise. She thought of the wrench in the garage, the clean floor, and now Roger's fleeting hesitation. Each was a thread in a tapestry not yet complete. Settling back into her chair, Miss Marple picked up her knitting, the needles resuming their rhythmic dance. The Silver Arrow's disappearance was a puzzle, but puzzles, she had learned, were solved not by machines but by people. Roger Blake had a motive, perhaps fame, rivalry, or something less obvious. But so did others, and Miss Marple's next step would be to unravel their stories, one by one. "Human nature," she murmured, her eyes on the growing scarf, "is such a reliable guide, and such a treacherous one." Chapter 4. The Mechanic's Motive. The evening shadows stretched long across St. Mary Mead, their edges softening the village's quaint outlines, as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the Blue Boar, the local pub where gossip flowed as freely as the ale. The disappearance of the Silver Arrow had set tongues wagging, and Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct for human nature, knew that the pub's smoky air would carry whispers worth hearing. She had arranged to meet Tom Weaver, the head mechanic, under the guise of discussing a distant cousin's interest in motor cars. Such pretexts, she found, opened doors that direct questions often closed. The Blue Boar was a sturdy, timbered building, its low ceiling blackened by years of hearth smoke, and its tables worn smooth by countless elbows. Miss Marple settled into a corner nook, her black shawl blending with the shadows, and ordered a modest glass of sherry. The pub was lively tonight, filled with villagers, speculating about the theft. She overheard fragments, a farmer's grumble about fancy cars causing trouble, a barmaid's tale of a stranger seen near the garage, and old Mr. Pye's insistence that young Blake's carelessness was to blame. Miss Marple listened, her face serene, but her mind catalogued each word, much as she might note a dropped stitch in her knitting. Tom Weaver arrived, his heavy boots thudding against the flagstone floor. He was a broad man, his face weathered and his hands stained with oil that no amount of scrubbing could erase. A limp, the legacy of a racing accident years ago, gave his gait an uneven rhythm. He spotted Miss Marple and approached, his expression guarded but polite. "Evening, Miss Marple," he said, easing into the chair opposite her. "Heard you wanted a word about motors. Not much for tea parties, so I reckon this'll do." "Quite so, Mr. Weaver," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "My cousin in Radford is most keen on racing, and I thought you, being the expert behind the Silver Arrow, might enlighten me. Such a pity about the car's disappearance." Her tone was light, but her eyes, sharp as ever, watched his reaction. Tom's scowl deepened, his fingers tightening around the pint of ale the barmaid set before him. "Pity's putting it mild," he growled. "That car was my work, every bolt, every gear. Took months to get her right, and now she's gone. Like as not because of some fool's carelessness." His voice carried a bitter edge, and Miss Marple noted the way. His gaze flicked toward the door, as if wary of being overheard. "Carelessness?" she prompted, her voice soft as the sherry's glow in her glass. "You mean the garage being left unlocked, perhaps?" Tom shook his head, his jaw tight. "I locked it myself, 10 o'clock sharp, after Blake finished his fussing. I checked the door, the windows, everything. My wife'll tell you I was home by past, dead tired. Whoever took that car knew what they were doing." His words were firm, but his eyes slid away, and Miss Marple, who had once known a gardener whose resentment simmered beneath a gruff exterior, sensed a crack in his armor. "I see," she said, sipping her sherry. "It must be terribly frustrating, especially after all your hard work. I understand you and Mr. Blake don't always see eye to eye?" Her question was gentle, almost incidental, but she watched him closely, her mind recalling a village blacksmith who had nursed a grudge over a slight until it led to sabotage. Tom's face darkened, and he took a long pull from his pint before answering. "Blake's a show-off," he muttered. "Thinks he's the star, but it's my hands that keep the car running. Last year he pushed the engine too hard, blew a gasket, and had the nerve to blame me when we lost at Brookfield. Said I'd botched the tuning. Botched." His voice rose, drawing a glance from a nearby table, and he lowered it, his fingers drumming on the table. "I've half a mind he left the garage open himself, out of spite." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of mild surprise. "Surely not, Mr. Weaver. Mr. Blake seems so devoted to the Silver Arrow, but grudges can cloud judgment, can they not? I recall a young woman in my village, a seamstress, who took such offense at a neighbor's comment that she hid her best scissors just to cause trouble. People act strangely when they feel slighted. Tom shifted in his seat, his limp leg stretched awkwardly beneath the table. Well, I didn't hide no car, if that's what you're thinking, he said, his tone defensive. I was home, like I said. Ask Mary, she'll tell you. But his eyes darted to the side, and Miss Marple noted the faint flush creeping up his neck, much like a choir boy she had once caught pilfering from the collection plate, his guilt betrayed by a similar flush. Of course, she said, her voice soothing. Your wife must be a great comfort. I understand you've been married many years. The question seemed innocent, but Miss Marple knew that spouses often held the key to alibis, willingly or not. She recalled a village wife who had lied to protect her husband, only to let slip the truth under gentle probing. 20 years, Tom said, his tone softening. Mary's solid as they come. She don't like the racing much, says it's too dangerous, but she knows it's my life. She was up when I got home, mending my overalls. His words were steady, but Miss Marple detected a rehearsed quality, as if he had prepared the story. She made a mental note to visit Mrs. Weaver, whose hesitation might reveal more than her husband intended. The conversation turned to the mechanics of the Silver Arrow, Tom's expertise shining through as he described its engine with a reverence that bordered on affection. Miss Marple listened, her questions deftly steering him from technicalities to the night of the theft. "And you saw no one else at the garage?" she asked, her sherry glass poised. "No strangers? No vehicles nearby?" Tom shook his head, but his pause was a fraction too long. "Nobody," he said. "Just Blake, leaving before me. The place was quiet as a grave." He drained his pint, his movements abrupt, and Miss Marple's mind flickered to a poacher she had once known, whose denials were too quick, too certain, to be wholly true. As they parted, Tom muttering about work to be done, Miss Marple lingered in the pub, her sherry untouched. The barmaid, wiping a glass, mentioned a rumor. A lorry had been seen near the garage road that night, its lights dimmed and its markings obscured. Miss Marple filed this away, her thoughts returning to the wrench in the garage, its clean handle a silent accusation. Tom Weaver's bitterness toward Roger Blake was clear, but was it enough to drive him to betrayal? Or was he, like the gardener of her memory, a man whose loyalty had been bought or broken? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting needles resuming their steady rhythm. The blue boar's chatter had given her much to ponder. Tom's grudge, his shaky alibi, the mysterious lorry. She thought of the village seamstress again, whose petty act of spite had unraveled a larger scheme, and wondered if Tom's resentment was merely a thread in a greater tapestry. "People," she murmured, her needles clicking, "are so often their own worst enemies, and that, I fancy, is where the truth will lie." Chapter 5. The Sponsor's Shadow. The morning mist clung to the meadows of St. Mary Mead, veiling the village in a gauzy shroud as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the grand estate of Sir Henry Caldwell. The sponsor of the Silver Arrow, a man whose wealth from steelworks had elevated him to local prominence, lived in a Georgian manor that loomed over the village like a benevolent but watchful patriarch. Miss Marple, invited to a charity coffee morning hosted by Sir Henry's sister, saw an opportunity to observe the man whose fortune had birthed the missing race car. Her steps were slow but purposeful, her black umbrella shielding her from the damp as her mind sifted through the puzzle of the theft. The manor's gravel drive crunched underfoot as she approached, its windows glinting despite the overcast sky. Inside, the drawing room was a bustle of villagers, Mrs. Bantry with her usual exuberance, the vicar discussing parish funds, and a cluster of ladies admiring Sir Henry's collection of racing trophies displayed on a polished sideboard. Sir Henry himself stood by the fireplace, his broad frame clad in a tweed suit, his voice booming as he greeted guests. Yet Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing beneath surfaces, noted a strain in his smile, a flicker of unease in his florid face. She recalled a churchwarden from years past, whose hearty manner hid debts and desperation, and wondered what shadows lurked behind Sir Henry's bluster. "Miss Marple," Sir Henry called, spotting her as she entered. "A pleasure to see you. Come, have some coffee. None of that weak stuff, mind you. Proper strong brew." His joviality was almost convincing, but his eyes darted, and Miss Marple, accepting a cup with a polite nod, sensed a man playing a part. "Thank you, Sir Henry," she said, her voice as gentle as the mist outside. "Your hospitality is most kind, especially amidst such a troubling time. The loss of the Silver Arrow must be a great blow." She sipped her coffee, her eyes never leaving his face, noting the slight tightening of his jaw. "A blow? It's a blasted catastrophe," Sir Henry exclaimed, his voice carrying across the room. "That car was my triumph, Miss Marple, a masterpiece of British engineering. Cost me a fortune, but it was worth every penny to see it fly on the track. And now, stolen. I've told Craddock to turn the county upside down. Whoever did this will pay dearly." His indignation was loud, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward the window, as if he feared something, or someone, beyond the glass. She settled into a velvet chair, her small figure dwarfed by its grandeur, and steered the conversation with the skill of a seasoned navigator. "It must be a heavy responsibility," she said, "funding such a venture. The Silver Arrow was your vision, I understand?" "Indeed it was," Sir Henry said, puffing out his chest. "I saw the potential in Roger Blake's driving, and Tom Weaver's a wizard with engines. I put up the capital, brought in the best designers. The Grand Prix was to be our moment. Mine, the teams, the villages. Now it's all in jeopardy." His voice faltered, and Miss Marple, recalling a village squire, whose pride masked financial strain, wondered if Sir Henry's investment was as secure as he claimed. The room buzzed with chatter, but Miss Marple's attention remained on Sir Henry. She mentioned the rival team, led by Victor Lang, and watched his reaction. "I hear the Red Comet is quite formidable," she said, her tone casual. "Such competition must add pressure, I imagine." Sir Henry's face reddened, and he snorted. "Lang's a bounder, always has been. His team's got money but no class. He'd love to see us fail, no doubt, but stealing a car? Even he wouldn't stoop that low." Yet his words lacked conviction, and his hand, gripping his coffee cup, trembled slightly. Miss Marple thought of a vicar she had known, whose loud denials of gossip hid a guilty secret, and filed the observation away. As the coffee morning progressed, Miss Marple mingled, her ears attuned to the village's pulse. Mrs. Bantry, ever talkative, mentioned a rumor. Sir Henry had been seen dining with Victor Lang in Dunworth a week before the theft, a meeting he had not mentioned to the police. "Business," he called it, Mrs. Bantry said, her eyes wide. "But what business does a sponsor have with a rival?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to a village treasurer who had met secretly with a rival parish only to be caught siphoning funds. She approached Sir Henry again, this time by the trophy cabinet, where he was regaling a guest with tales of past races. "Sir Henry," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I understand you've had dealings with Mr. Lang recently. Might he have known about the silver arrow's design, perhaps?" Sir Henry's smile froze, and for a moment his eyes betrayed a flash of panic. "Dealings? Nonsense," he said too quickly. "Just a courtesy call, you know, sponsor to sponsor. We discussed general matters. Nothing about the car." His voice was firm, but his fingers fumbled with a trophy, nearly toppling it. Miss Marple, who had once seen a housekeeper drop a teacup when questioned about a theft, noted the slip. "Of Resolver." "Of course," she said, writing the trophy with care. "One must be neighborly, I suppose, but it's curious, isn't it, how such meetings can be misunderstood?" Her tone was innocent, but her eyes were sharp, and Sir Henry's flush deepened. "Misunderstood? I've nothing to hide," he blustered, but he turned away, engaging another guest with forced cheer. Miss Marple watched him, her mind busy. The rumor of the dinner, his evasive manner, the tremor in his hand, these were not the actions of a man at ease. She thought of the churchwarden again, whose loud proclamations of honesty had crumbled under scrutiny, and wondered if Sir Henry's pride in the silver arrow masked a deeper motive, perhaps a financial one. As she left the manor, thanking Sir Henry's sister for the morning, Miss Marple walked slowly down the drive, her umbrella tapping the gravel. The mist had lifted, but the air held a chill, and her thoughts were heavy with suspicion. Sir Henry's wealth was evident, yet wealth could be a facade, as she had seen in a village merchant who flaunted prosperity while his accounts bled. Had Sir Henry insured the silver arrow heavily, perhaps to profit from its loss? Or had his meeting with Victor Lang been more than a courtesy, a step toward betrayal? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lit a small fire and sat with her knitting, the needles moving in their familiar dance. The silver arrow's theft was a web of motives, and Sir Henry, with his bluster and secrets, was a thread that needed pulling. She thought of the clean garage floor, the misplaced wrench, Roger Blake's hesitation, Tom Weaver's grudge, and now Sir Henry's evasive dinner. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom, knew that the truth lay in their connections. "Pride," she murmured, her eyes on the flickering flames, "is a dangerous thing, and so, I fear, is greed." Chapter 6. Whispers of Rivalry. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the Dunworth Circuit, a sprawling racetrack a few miles from the village. The Grand Prix was mere days away, yet the theft of the silver arrow had cast a pall over the event, turning anticipation into unease. Miss Marple, her black handbag tucked under her arm, had decided to attend a practice session, ostensibly to satisfy a cousin's curiosity about motor racing. In truth, she sought to observe Victor Lang, the cunning leader of the rival team, whose red comet was now the race's frontrunner. Her instincts, honed by years of unraveling village intrigues, told her that the shadow of rivalry might hold the key to the missing car. The circuit was a hive of activity, its grandstands half filled with early spectators, and its pits alive with the roar of engines and the clatter of tools. Miss Marple, her sensible hat shielding her from the late afternoon glare, found a seat near the edge of the stands, where she could watch both the track and the team enclosures. The Red Comet, a sleek machine of crimson and chrome, gleamed under the sun as its mechanics swarmed around it, their movements precise but tense. Victor Lang stood at the center, a lean figure in a tailored suit, his sharp features framed by a confident smile. He barked orders with the ease of a man accustomed to command, yet Miss Marple noted the way. His eyes scanned the crowd, as if searching for a threat or an opportunity. She opened her handbag, pulling out a small pair of opera glasses, a relic from her youth that served her well in such settings. Through them, she studied Victor's demeanor, the quick, almost predatory tilt of his head, the way his smile sharpened when speaking to his driver, a wiry young man named Eddie Crane. Miss Marple recalled a village poacher long ago, whose charm masked a ruthless streak, and she wondered if Victor's polished exterior hid a similar edge. His team, she knew, had motive aplenty. The Red Comet's reputation depended on outshining the Silver Arrow, and with the latter gone, victory seemed assured. As the practice laps began, Miss Marple turned her glasses to the crowd, her keen eyes picking out familiar faces. Mrs. Bantry, ever enthusiastic, waved from a nearby seat, her hat a riot of feathers. A cluster of villagers whispered excitedly, their talk peppered with speculation about the theft. One voice, belonging to young Mr. Hodges, the baker's son, caught her attention. "Saw a lorry near the garage road that night," he said to a companion, his tone low but clear. "No lights, no markings, just idling by the hedge. Odd, wasn't it?" Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. She recalled a smuggler from her youth, whose unmarked cart had been the key to a theft. The lorry, she decided, warranted further inquiry. The practice session ended, and Miss Marple made her way toward the pits, her steps slow but deliberate. She had no official business there, but her unassuming presence, elderly, slightly stooped, with a smile that disarmed suspicion, often opened doors. A young mechanic, wiping sweat from his brow, nodded as she approached, mistaking her for a harmless spectator. "Quite a machine, the Red Comet," she remarked, her voice mild. "I suppose Mr. Lang is confident of victory now, with the Silver Arrow gone?" The mechanic grinned, then caught himself, glancing toward Victor, who was deep in conversation with Eddie Crane. "Mr. Lang's always confident," he said cautiously. "But yeah, the arrow's out of the picture, so it's our race to lose." His words were casual, but Miss Marple noted a flicker of unease, as if he regretted speaking. She thanked him and moved on, her mind turning to a village gossip who had let slip a secret with similar reluctance. Victor Lang noticed her then, his sharp eyes narrowing as he strode over. "Miss Marple, isn't it?" he said, his smile smooth but calculating. "I heard you've been asking about the Silver Arrow. A curious old lady, aren't you?" His tone was teasing, but there was a bite beneath it, and Miss Marple, who had faced sharper barbs from village matrons, met his gaze with serene composure. "Merely interested, Mr. Lang," she replied, her opera glasses dangling innocently from her hand. "A car vanishing so completely is quite a puzzle, don't you think? And with the Red Comet now the favorite, some might wonder if your team had a hand in it." Her words were gentle, but her eyes were steady, and she saw Victor's smile tighten, like a mask slipping just enough to reveal the truth beneath. "Wonder all they like," he said, his voice light but his eyes cold. "My team's focused on winning, not stealing. The Silver Arrow's loss is Caldwell's problem, not mine. Though I'll admit, it's convenient." He laughed, a sound too sharp for mirth, and Miss Marple recalled a village solicitor who had laughed just so when accused of tampering with a will. She nodded, as if satisfied, and changed the subject. "Your red comet is impressive," she said. "Such a complex machine must require great skill to maintain. Do your mechanics ever share expertise with other teams, perhaps?" The question was subtle, but she watched Victor closely, noting the brief flicker of his eyelids. "We keep to ourselves," he said curtly. "Racing's cutthroat, Miss Marple. You don't share secrets if you want to win." He excused himself, claiming a meeting, but Miss Marple saw him glance back as he walked away, his confidence tinged with wariness. She thought of the poacher again, whose bold front had crumbled under scrutiny, and wondered what Victor's boldness concealed. As she left the circuit, the sun dipping below the horizon, Miss Marple paused to speak with Mr. Hodges, who was lingering by the gate. "You mentioned a lorry, Mr. Hodges," she said, her tone conversational. "Near the garage, you said? Could you describe it?" Hodges, flattered by her attention, nodded eagerly. "Big thing, dark, no markings I could see. Parked by the hedge, lights off around midnight. I was walking home from the pub. Thought it odd, but didn't think much of it till now." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. A lorry, unmarked and stealthy, suggested planning, not chance. She recalled a theft in St. Mary Mead, where a cart hidden in shadows had carried stolen goods to a barn, and she resolved to share this with Inspector Craddock. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her window, the village now cloaked in twilight. Her knitting lay untouched, her thoughts consumed by the day's observations. Victor Lang's sharp smile, the mechanic's unease, the lorry's ghostly presence. These were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to rivalry, but not yet to proof. She thought of the wrench in the garage, Roger Blake's hesitation, Tom Weaver's grudge, Sir Henry's evasions, and now Victor's guarded confidence. Each was a thread, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, knew that pulling one might unravel the whole. "Rivalry," she murmured, her eyes on the darkening sky, "is a powerful spur, but so is fear of being caught." Chapter 7. A Curious Clue. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a gentle flush, the first light creeping through the mist to touch the dew-laden roses outside Miss Jane Marple's cottage. She rose early, as was her habit, her mind already turning over the threads of the Silver Arrow's disappearance. The racetrack's bustle, Victor Lang's sharp-edged confidence, and the whispered tale of an unmarked lorry had deepened her sense that the theft was no impulsive act, but a carefully woven scheme. Today, she resolved to return to the scene of the crime, for Miss Marple knew that places, like people, often held secrets in their overlooked corners. After a light breakfast of tea and toast, she donned her sturdy coat and hat, her black umbrella tucked under her arm despite the clear sky. The walk to Sir Henry Caldwell's garage was brisk, the village stirring with the soft clatter of daily life. Milk bottles on doorsteps, the postman's whistle, a dog barking in the distance. Yet the air carried a tension, as if the theft had unsettled St. Mary Mead's quiet rhythm. Miss Marple's steps were measured, her eyes scanning the path not for beauty, but for anything out of place, a habit born of years untangling village mysteries. The garage stood as she had last seen it, its corrugated iron walls gleaming dully under the morning sun. Inspector Craddock had posted a constable at the gate, a young man who nodded respectfully as she approached. "Just a look, Miss Marple," he asked, accustomed to her quiet presence at crime scenes. "If I may," she replied, her smile disarming. "Sometimes, you know, a second glance reveals what the first missed." The constable stepped aside, and she entered the cavernous space, its emptiness stark without the silver arrow's sleek form. The concrete floor, still curiously clean where the car had stood, contrasted with the oil-stained corners. The workbench remained as she remembered, though the stray wrench was now in police custody. Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, her mind recalling a village theft where a single overlooked detail, a smudged footprint, had pointed to the culprit. She paced slowly, her umbrella tapping the floor, until a faint glint in the grass just outside the open garage door caught her eye. Stooping with care, her joints protesting, she peered at the object. A small, pristine screw, its threads gleaming as if untouched by the garage's grime. She retrieved a handkerchief from her handbag, wrapping the screw carefully before tucking it away. "Curious," she murmured, her eyes narrowing. The screw was too clean, too new, to belong to the Silver Arrow's well-worn machinery. Yet it was no random debris. She recalled a maid in St. Mary Mead, years ago, who had dropped a hairpin at a theft, a tiny clue that unraveled a larger scheme. Back in the village, Miss Marple sought out Mr. Ellis, a retired mechanic who now tended his garden but retained a sharp mind for engines. His cottage was a modest affair, its front bursting with dahlias. Over a cup of tea in his cluttered parlor, she produced the screw, unwrapping it with care. "Mr. Ellis," she said, her voice gentle, "you know motor cars better than most. Might this belong to the Silver Arrow?" Mr. Ellis, his hands gnarled but steady, examined the screw through a magnifying glass. "Not from the Arrow, Miss Marple," he said after a moment. "It's a precision job, metric threading, unusual for our team's designs. Looks more like something from a newer model, maybe foreign. I'd wager it's from Victor Lang's lot. The Red Comet uses parts like these." His tone was certain, and Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her mind turning to a village jeweler who had identified a stolen gem by its cut. "Thank you, Mr. Ellis," she said, rewrapping the screw. "You've been most helpful." As she left, the screw safe in her handbag, she felt the puzzle shift, like a kaleidoscope revealing a new pattern. The screw was no accident. It was a trace left behind, perhaps carelessly, by someone connected to the Red Comet. But how had they entered the locked garage, and who had aided them? She thought of the lorry Mr. Hodges had seen, its stealth suggesting complicity, and resolved to press further. At the village hall, where a sewing circle provided cover for gossip, Miss Marple listened as the ladies discussed the theft. Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, mentioned a stranger at the Blue Boar the night before the theft, a man with a sharp accent who asked about the garage's hours. Miss Marple, threading a needle with practiced ease, noted this, recalling a traveler who had once probed village routines before a burglary. The stranger, like the screw, was a piece of the puzzle, pointing to an outsider's hand, perhaps Victor Lang's. As noon approached, Miss Marple visited Inspector Craddock at the police station, a small building cluttered with files and the hum of a typewriter. She presented the screw, her voice mild but firm. "Inspector, I found this near the garage. Mr. Ellis believes it may belong to the Red Comet's design. It seems our thief was not as careful as they thought." Craddock's eyebrows rose, and he took the screw, turning it in his fingers. "Well, I'll be, Miss Marple. This could point to Lang's team, but we'll need more than a screw to make a case. No prints on the wrench, by the way, and Weaver's alibi holds, for now. His wife swears he was home by 10:30. His tone was skeptical, and Miss Marple nodded, her mind on a village wife who had once lied to protect her husband, only to falter under scrutiny. Perhaps a word with Mrs. Weaver might clarify, they thought. A single clue, overlooked, could lead to the truth, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to find it. Chapter 8. The alibi unraveled. The afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of St. Mary Mead's police station, casting delicate patterns on the worn wooden floor as Miss Jane Marple sat across from Inspector Craddock. The small office, cluttered with files and the faint scent of ink, was a far cry from the sleek modernity of the racing garage, yet it was here, in the quiet exchange of facts and suspicions, that Miss Marple felt the puzzle of the Silver Arrow's theft begin to take shape. Her discovery of the screw, identified by Mr. Ellis as likely belonging to the Red Comet, had sharpened her focus on Victor Lang's team, but she knew that the key to the theft lay closer to home, within the circle of those who had access to the garage. Tom Weaver's alibi, though seemingly solid, nagged at her, much like a village rumor that refused to settle. Craddock leaned back in his chair, his face a mix of respect and exasperation. "That screw's a fine find, Miss Marple," he said, tapping the handkerchief-wrapped object on his desk. "It points to Lang's lot, no question, but it's not enough to haul them in. We need evidence of how they got into a locked garage, and who helped them. Weaver's sticking to his story, and his wife backs him up. Home by 10:30, she says, mending his overalls." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Wives, Inspector, are often loyal, even when the truth is inconvenient. I recall a young woman in St. Mary Mead, a grocer's wife, who swore her husband was home all evening, only to admit later he'd slipped out for an hour. Perhaps a visit to Mrs. Weaver might shed light?" Her tone was gentle, but her suggestion carried the weight of experience, and Craddock, who had learned to trust her instincts, nodded. "Worth a try," he said. "Care to come along? You've a way of getting people to talk." Miss Marple agreed, and soon they were walking through the village, her umbrella tapping the cobbles, as they approached the Weavers' modest cottage on the edge of St. Mary Mead. The garden was neat, its roses pruned with care, but the curtains were drawn, giving the house a guarded air. Miss Marple noted this, recalling a village spinster who had drawn her curtains to hide a secret meeting. Mrs. Mary Weaver answered the door, a slight woman with tired eyes and a nervous smile. Her hands, rough from years of housework, twisted a dishcloth as she invited them in. The parlor was small but tidy, with a sewing basket on the table and a photograph of a younger Tom grinning beside a race car on the mantel. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her manner as soothing as the ticking clock, while Craddock stood by the door, his presence official but unobtrusive. "Mrs. Weaver," Miss Marple began, her voice soft, "we're so sorry to trouble you, but the loss of the Silver Arrow has us all puzzled. Your husband's work on that car was remarkable, I hear. It must be a terrible blow to him." Mary nodded, her hands still twisting the cloth. "It's hit him hard, Miss Marple. Tom put his heart into that car. He was home that night, like he said, by 10:30. I was mending his overalls when he came in, worn out from the garage." Her words were steady, but her eyes darted to Craddock, and Miss Marple, who had once seen a housekeeper falter under gentle questioning, sensed a crack in her resolve. "How kind of you to mend his things so late," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "It must be difficult, with his long hours. Did he stay home all evening after that?" The question was casual, but her eyes were sharp, watching Mary's face. Mary hesitated, her fingers tightening on the cloth. "Well, yes, of course," she said, but her voice wavered, and she glanced at the floor. "He was tired, went straight to bed." The pause was brief, but to Miss Marple it was as telling as a shout. She recalled a village wife who had hesitated just so when covering for her husband's absence, and she pressed gently, like a needle threading through delicate fabric. "I'm sure he was exhausted," Miss Marple said, "though I suppose he might have stepped out briefly, perhaps to fetch something from the shed. I know my nephew does that when he's restless." Her tone was conspiratorial, inviting confidence, and Mary's shoulders sagged slightly. "Well," Mary said, her voice low, "he did go out for a bit, now you mention it. Said he needed a tool from the shed, something about a job he'd forgotten. Wasn't gone long, maybe 10 minutes, around 11. I didn't think much of it." Her eyes widened, as if realizing she'd said too much, and she added quickly, "But he was back before I finished sewing, and he didn't go near the garage." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Of course, my dear. It's only natural to forget small details in all this upset." But her mind was racing. 10 minutes was enough to unlock a door, to signal a waiting lorry, to betray a team. She thought of a village postmistress, bribed to leave a gate unlatched, whose nervous confession had cracked a case wide open. Craddock, catching the shift in Mary's demeanor, stepped forward. "Mrs. Weaver, did Tom mention anything unusual that night? A phone call, perhaps, or a visitor?" Mary's face paled, and her hands stilled. "A call," she admitted, almost a whisper. "Just before he went to the shed. I didn't hear much, but it was a man's voice, sharp-like. Tom said it was nothing, just work." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple's heart softened, though her mind remained clear. Mary was no conspirator, but her loyalty to Tom had trapped her in a half-truth. "Thank you, Mrs. Weaver," Miss Marple said, rising. "You've been most helpful. We shan't trouble you further." As they left, Craddock's face was grim, and Miss Marple's thoughts were heavy with suspicion. Tom's alibi, once solid, was now porous, and the mysterious call suggested a connection to someone outside, perhaps Victor Lang, whose screw lay wrapped in her handbag. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting untouched as she pondered. The screw, the lorry, Tom's brief absence, the unknown caller. These were not random threads, but part of a deliberate pattern. She recalled a village scandal where a single lie, unraveling, had exposed a web of deceit, and she sensed Tom Weaver was caught in such a web. Had he been bribed, coerced, or driven by his grudge against Roger Blake? And how did Sir Henry's secret dinner with Victor Lang fit into the tapestry? "People," she murmured, her eyes on the flickering flames, "are so easily swayed by promises or pride, but truth, like a dropped stitch, always shows in the end." Chapter 9. The Sponsor's Secret. The soft glow of lamplight bathed St. Mary Mead's village hall, where the annual charity tea was in full swing, its tables laden with scones, jam, and the hum of gossip. Miss Jane Marple, seated near a window with a view of the darkening green, held a delicate china cup, her eyes scanning the room with the quiet alertness of a hawk. The theft of the silver arrow had cast a shadow over the village, and the event, meant to raise funds for the church roof, had become a stage for whispered theories and sidelong glances. Miss Marple, ever attuned to the currents of human nature, had come to observe Sir Henry Caldwell, whose evasive manner at his manor had stirred her suspicions. Today, she hoped, the relaxed chatter of the tea might coax out truths that formal settings suppressed. Sir Henry stood near the center of the hall, his broad figure commanding attention as he regaled a group of villagers with tales of racing triumphs. His voice, as booming as ever, carried a forced joviality, and Miss Marple noted the way. His hands gestured too widely, as if to distract from his eyes' unease. She recalled a village merchant whose loud laughter had masked a failing business, and wondered what Sir Henry's bravado concealed. The rumor of his dinner with Victor Lang, the rival team's leader, lingered in her mind, a thread yet to be pulled. She sipped her tea, her gaze drifting to Mrs. Bantry, who was holding court at a nearby table. "It's peculiar, isn't it?" Mrs. Bantry was saying, her voice carrying over the clink of cups. Sir Henry, dining with that Lang fellow just days before the theft. Business, he called it. But what business does a sponsor have with a rival? Mark my words, there's something fishy there. The other ladies nodded, their whispers buzzing like bees, and Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Gossip, she knew, was often a distorted mirror, but it could reflect fragments of truth. Rising with the grace of long habit, Miss Marple approached Sir Henry, her small figure almost lost among the crowd. "Sir Henry," she said, her voice as gentle as the lamplight, "what a splendid event! Your generosity does the village proud. I do hope the loss of the Silver Arrow hasn't dampened your spirits too much." Sir Henry turned, his smile quick but strained. "Miss Marple, not at all, not at all. The show must go on, you know. The Grand Prix will still be a spectacle, even without our car." His words were hearty, but his eyes flickered, and he mopped his brow with a handkerchief, though the room was cool. Miss Marple, who had once seen a churchwarden sweat under questioning, noted the gesture. "It's admirable, your resilience," she said, settling into a chair he offered. "Though I imagine it's a heavy blow, financially. The Silver Arrow was quite an investment, was it not?" Her question was mild, but her eyes were sharp, watching for the telltale signs of discomfort. Sir Henry's smile faltered, and he cleared his throat. "Oh, a fortune, yes, but worth it for the glory. Racing's a gamble, Miss Marple. Win some, lose some, I'll recover." His tone was dismissive, but his fingers fumbled with the handkerchief, and Miss Marple recalled a village squire whose boasts of wealth had crumbled when his debts were exposed. She steered the conversation deftly, like a needle through fine cloth. "I hear you met with Mr. Lang recently," she said, her voice casual. "A courtesy, I suppose, between men of influence in the racing world?" The question hung in the air, and Sir Henry's face reddened, his eyes darting to the side as if seeking escape. "Courtesy, exactly," he said too quickly. "Just a chat over dinner, you know, to keep things civil. Lang's a competitor, but no need for bad blood." His laugh was forced, and Miss Marple's mind flickered to a vicar who had laughed just so when questioned about a missing collection plate, his guilt betrayed by his haste. "Of course," she said, her smile serene. "Though some might wonder if such a meeting touched on the Silver Arrow, its design, perhaps, or its security." Her words were gentle, but they struck a nerve, and Sir Henry's hand jerked, nearly spilling his tea. "Nothing of the sort," he blustered, his voice loud enough to draw glances. "We talked sponsorships, general matters, nothing about the car. I'd never share trade secrets, Miss Marple. The very idea." His indignation was fierce, but his eyes avoided hers, and she saw a flush creep up his neck, much like a housekeeper she had known, whose denials had unraveled under scrutiny. Miss Marple nodded, as if satisfied, and turned the conversation to the charity tea's success. But her mind was busy. Sir Henry's reaction confirmed Mrs. Bantry's rumor, and his discomfort suggested the dinner with Victor Lang was more than a courtesy. Had he been tempted by an offer, perhaps to undermine his own team for profit? Or had he unwittingly revealed details that aided the theft? She thought of a village treasurer whose secret meetings had led to a betrayal, and resolved to dig deeper. As the tea wound down, Miss Marple lingered, her ears attuned to the room's chatter. A young woman, the vicar's niece, mentioned overhearing Sir Henry on the telephone days before the theft, his voice low and urgent, mentioning a deal and keeping it quiet. Miss Marple filed this away, recalling a village gossip who had overheard a similar call, leading to a thief's downfall. The pieces, Sir Henry's evasions, the screw from the Red Comet, Tom Weaver's broken alibi, the mysterious lorry, were forming a pattern, but it was not yet complete. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the village now cloaked in dusk. Her knitting lay idle, her thoughts consumed by Sir Henry's flushed face and fumbling hands. Greed, she knew, could drive even the proudest men to folly, and Sir Henry's pride in the silver arrow might mask a darker motive. "Secrets," she murmured, her eyes on the flickering flames, "are like shadows. They follow you, and sooner or later, the light reveals them." Chapter 10. The Rival's Gambit. The morning air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp edge, as if the village itself sensed the tightening knot of the silver arrow's mystery. Miss Jane Marple, her black shawl draped over her shoulders, stood at her cottage window, gazing at the mist curling over the green. The clues she had gathered, the pristine screw, Tom Weaver's faltering alibi, Sir Henry Caldwell's evasive bluster, and the whispered rumors of Victor Lang's involvement, formed a tapestry in her mind, its pattern nearly complete, but for a crucial thread. Today, she resolved to follow the trail of the unmarked lorry seen near the garage, a lead that pointed toward Victor Lang's rival team in Dunworth. With Inspector Craddock's reluctant agreement, she set out to uncover the truth, her steps as purposeful as ever. The journey to Dunworth was short, a bumpy ride in Craddock's police car along lanes bordered by hedgerows. The town, larger and busier than St. Mary Mead, hummed with the anticipation of the looming Grand Prix, its streets lined with posters of sleek cars and dashing drivers. Victor Lang's team headquarters, a converted warehouse on the outskirts, loomed ahead, its steel facade as imposing as the man himself. Miss Marple, clutching her handbag, stepped out of the car, her unassuming figure a stark contrast to the modern bustle around her. Craddock, at her side, muttered, "I hope this isn't a wild goose chase, Miss Marple. Lang's slippery, and we've no warrant to search." "Patience, Inspector," she replied, her eyes twinkling. "A goose chase, as you call it, often leads to unexpected nests. Shall we?" Her voice was mild, but her resolve was steel, and Craddock, accustomed to her uncanny knack, followed her lead. The warehouse's interior was a hive of activity, with mechanics tinkering on the Red Comet and crates of parts stacked high. Victor Lang emerged from an office, his sharp smile unwavering as he spotted them. "Inspector Miss Marple," he said, his tone smooth as polished chrome. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to admire the red comet before it takes the Grand Prix?" His eyes gleamed with mockery, but Miss Marple noted a faint tension in his posture, like a cat poised to spring. "We're here about the Silver Arrow," Craddock said bluntly. "We've reason to believe your team may know something about its disappearance. A screw from your car was found at the scene, and a lorry was spotted near the garage that night. Unmarked, lights off. Care to explain?" Victor's smile didn't falter, but his fingers twitched, a gesture Miss Marple caught, recalling a village solicitor whose nervous tic had betrayed his lies. "A screw?" he said, laughing softly. "You're building a case on a bit of metal? As for lorries, I don't keep track of every vehicle in Dunworth. My team's been here, preparing for the race. You're welcome to look around, Inspector, but you'll find nothing." His confidence was bold, but Miss Marple sensed a bluff, much like a village gambler who had overplayed his hand. "Most kind of you, Mr. Lang," she said, her voice gentle. "I wonder, though, if you have a barn or storage nearby. A lorry, you see, might need a place to rest after a late-night errand." Her question was casual, but her eyes were sharp, and Victor's smile flickered, a crack in his polished facade. "No barns," he said quickly. "We keep everything here, but feel free to check." He gestured expansively, but Miss Marple noted his glance toward a mechanic, a burly man who shifted uneasily. She recalled a poacher who had signaled an accomplice with a similar look, and her suspicions deepened. Craddock, with a nod from Miss Marple, began a cursory search of the warehouse, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. Miss Marple, meanwhile, wandered toward the mechanic, her manner as unthreatening as a village spinster. "Such a busy place," she remarked, her opera glasses dangling from her hand. "You must work long hours to keep the Red Comet running. Ever use a lorry for moving parts, perhaps to a barn nearby?" The mechanic, caught off guard, mumbled, "We've got lorries, sure, but they stay here. No barns." But his eyes darted to Victor, and Miss Marple, who had once coaxed a confession from a nervous maid, pressed gently. "Not even for storage. I heard there's a barn just off the Dunworth Road, near the old mill. A lorry was seen there, you know, the night the Silver Arrow vanished." The mechanic's face paled, and he stammered, I don't know about that. I just fix cars." But his hesitation was damning, and Miss Marple's mind raced. She recalled a smuggler's barn, hidden in plain sight, where stolen goods were stashed, and she signaled Craddock with a subtle nod. "Mind if we take a drive to that barn?" Craddock asked Victor, his tone firm. Victor shrugged, his smile tight, but he didn't object, and soon they were in the police car, heading toward the old mill. The barn, weathered and half hidden by overgrown brambles, stood a mile from the warehouse. As they approached, Miss Marple's heart quickened, sensing the puzzle's edge drawing near. Inside, under a tarp in the dim light, was the Silver Arrow, its silver curves scuffed but unmistakable. Craddock's jaw tightened, and Victor's face drained of color, though he protested. "This is absurd. I've never seen this barn used." But the mechanic, now trembling, let slip a fatal admission. "I was told to store it here, just for a night, I swear." His eyes flicked to Victor, and Miss Marple saw the truth. A plan orchestrated by Lang with an insider's help. Back at the warehouse, Craddock questioned the mechanic, who confessed to driving the lorry under Victor's orders, paid to keep silent. Victor denied everything, his voice rising. But Miss Marple's quiet gaze held him, recalling a village thief whose denials had crumbled under pressure. The silver arrow was secured, but the question of who had unlocked the garage remained, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Tom Weaver's broken alibi and Sir Henry's secret dinner. As they left Dunworth, the car's recovery a triumph, Miss Marple sat silently, her mind weaving the final threads. Victor's gambit had been bold, but it required complicity, and she suspected the answer lay back in St. Mary Mead. "Cleverness," she murmured, her eyes on the passing fields, "is a fragile shield when greed is the sword." Chapter 11. The Betrayal Revealed. The twilight settled over St. Mary Mead with a hush, the village's lamps casting pools of light on the cobbled lanes as Miss Jane Marple prepared for her final move in the puzzle of the Silver Arrow's theft. The car's recovery from the barn near Dunworth had confirmed Victor Lang's role, but the locked garage door pointed to an accomplice within the team. Tom Weaver's shaky alibi, Sir Henry Caldwell's evasive dinner, and Roger Blake's nervous charm lingered in her mind, each a thread in a web of deceit. To unravel it, she decided to gather the suspects under her own roof, where the cozy familiarity of her cottage might loosen guarded tongues. She sent notes to Roger, Tom, Sir Henry, and with Inspector Craddock's assistance, Victor Lang, inviting them for tea under the pretext of discussing the car's return. Her parlor was a picture of warmth, the fire crackling and the tea tray laden with delicate sandwiches and a Victoria sponge. Miss Marple, in her best black dress, moved with quiet purpose, arranging chairs to ensure each guest faced her discerning gaze. As the clock struck 5, her guests arrived, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Roger Blake, his boyish charm dimmed by tension, took a seat near the window, his hands restless. Tom Weaver, his oil-stained fingers clutching a cap, sat stiffly, his limp leg stretched out. Sir Henry Caldwell, his florid face flushed with indignation, claimed the largest chair, while Victor Lang, summoned under Craddock's watchful eye, lounged with a forced nonchalance, his sharp smile intact but brittle. Craddock stood by the door, his presence a silent reminder of the law. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice as gentle as the firelight. "The return of the Silver Arrow is a relief, but the question of how it was taken remains. I thought we might discuss it as friends over tea." Her smile was disarming, but her eyes were sharp, and she noted the quick glances exchanged among the men. Roger's to Tom, Tom's to the floor, Sir Henry's to Victor, and Victor's cool appraisal of her. She poured tea, the ritual calming the room's tension, and began with the screw, unwrapping it from her handkerchief and placing it on the table. "This was found near the garage," she said, her tone mild. "Mr. Ellis, a most knowledgeable mechanic, believes it belongs to the Red Comet. Curious, don't you think, Mr. Lang, that it appeared where the Silver Arrow vanished?" Victor's smile tightened, but he shrugged, his voice smooth. "A screw proves nothing, Miss Marple. Parts get dropped. My team had no reason to steal a car we'd beat on the track." His confidence was slick, but Miss Marple recalled a village gambler whose bravado had masked a losing hand, and she pressed on. "Perhaps," she said, "but a lorry was seen near the garage that night, unmarked and stealthy. It led us to a barn, where the Silver Arrow was hidden. Under your orders, Mr. Lang, as your mechanic confessed." Victor's eyes flashed, but he said nothing, and Miss Marple turned to Tom, her gaze softening. "Mr. Weaver, you were at the garage that night, locking up after Mr. Blake. Yet your wife mentioned a brief absence. 10 minutes to fetch a tool, you said, and a phone call from a man with a sharp voice." Tom's face reddened, his hands clenching his cap. "I told you, I was home by 10:30. I didn't let no one in." But his voice cracked, and Miss Marple, who had once seen a blacksmith falter under gentle probing, continued. "I believe you, Mr. Weaver, that you didn't mean harm," she said. "But resentment can cloud judgment. You felt slighted by Mr. Blake, blamed for a past loss. I recall a gardener in our village, a good man, who let bitterness lead him to a foolish act. Did someone, perhaps Mr. Lang, offer you a way to settle that grudge?" Her words were soft, but they struck like a needle, and Tom's shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor. Sir Henry blustered. "This is preposterous. Are you accusing Tom of treason?" But Miss Marple turned to him, her voice steady. "Sir Henry, your dinner with Mr. Lang raises questions. You spoke of business, but was it a deal to undermine your own team? I've known men of pride, like a churchwarden once, whose greed led them astray." Sir Henry's face purpled, but before he could protest, Tom broke, his voice hoarse. "It was Lang," he said, his cap falling to the floor. "He called me that night, offered £1,000 to leave the garage door unlocked, said it'd teach Blake a lesson. I was angry. Blake's always blaming me, acting like I'm nothing. I didn't think they'd take the car, just tamper with it." His confession hung in the air, and Victor's smile vanished, his eyes cold. "Prove it," Victor snapped, but Craddock stepped forward, his notebook open. "We've got the mechanic's statement, Lang, and the lorry's traced to your team. It's enough to start." Roger, silent until now, stared at Tom, his face a mix of shock and betrayal. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene. "People," she said, "are swayed by small things, grudges, promises, pride. But truth, like a dropped stitch, always shows." She recalled a village scandal where a single confession had unraveled a conspiracy, and knew the case was nearly closed. As Craddock took Tom and Victor into custody, Sir Henry slumped, his bluster gone, and Roger shook his head, his charm muted by the truth. Miss Marple watched them go, her parlor quiet once more. The Silver Arrow was safe, but the cost of betrayal lingered, a reminder of human frailty. Chapter 12. The race restored. The morning of the Grand Prix dawned bright over St. Mary Mead, the sky a clear canvas of blue that seemed to promise redemption after the shadow of the Silver Arrow's theft. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her cottage window, watched the village stir with excitement, its lanes bustling with spectators heading to the Dunworth circuit. The recovery of the Silver Arrow, thanks to her quiet persistence, had restored the village's pride, but the sting of betrayal. Tom Weaver's confession and Victor Lang's cunning lingered like a faint chill. As she sipped her tea, her knitting idle for once, Miss Marple reflected on the frailties of human nature, so often laid bare by greed or resentment. The circuit was a spectacle of color and noise, its grandstands packed with villagers and visitors, their cheers rising as the cars lined up. The Silver Arrow, polished to a mirror, gleam despite its brief ordeal, stood ready, its silver curves catching the sun. Roger Blake, his boyish charm tempered by the week's events, climbed into the cockpit with a focus Miss Marple had not seen before. She had declined an invitation to the VIP stands, preferring her usual spot near the edge, where her opera glasses could capture both the race and the crowd's undercurrents. Inspector Craddock, beside her, tipped his hat. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said, a wry smile on his lips. "Lang's in custody, and Weaver's facing charges. The car's back, and the race is on." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Not I, Inspector, but human nature itself. People reveal themselves, given time." She adjusted her glasses, noting Sir Henry Caldwell in the stands, his bluster subdued but his pride intact, now that his investment was safe. The Red Comet, under a new team leader after Victor's arrest, gleamed nearby, but its aura of invincibility was dimmed. As the race began, the roar of engines filled the air, and the Silver Arrow surged forward, Roger's skill evident in its precise maneuvers. Miss Marple watched, not for the speed, but for the resolution of the drama she had unraveled. She recalled a village fete, years ago, where a stolen prize had been returned just in time, and the joy of restoration had outweighed the scandal. Here, too, the race was more than a contest. It was a triumph over deceit. The laps passed in a blur, the Silver Arrow neck and neck with the Red Comet, until Roger, with a daring move on the final turn, edged ahead, crossing the finish line to a roar of applause. The village erupted, their cheers a balm for the week's wounds. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her thoughts on a young man she had known, whose moment of redemption had come through honest effort after a misstep. After the race, as Roger stood on the podium, his grin genuine, Miss Marple made her way back to St. Mary Mead, her umbrella tapping the path. At her cottage, she welcomed Craddock for a final tea, the fire crackling as they reviewed the case. Tom Weaver was swayed by a grudge, she said, her needles clicking once more, a pale blue scarf growing. Victor Lang by ambition, Sir Henry by pride, perhaps tempted but not guilty. Roger, though reckless, was true to his car. People, Inspector, are much the same, whether in a village or a racetrack. Their motives, greed, envy, pride, betray them, but a keen eye can always find the truth. Craddock nodded, his notebook closed. "You've a gift, Miss Marple. We'd have been chasing shadows without you." She smiled, her eyes on her knitting. The village settled back into its quiet rhythm, the Grand Prix a memory of triumph and treachery. As the fire died down, Miss Marple murmured, "The truth, like a good stitch, holds fast when you find it." And with that, she turned her thoughts to the next puzzle, for St. Mary Mead, like human nature, was never without one.